Oh man, the finale of Secret Invasion comes this close to telling us exactly when Rhodey got swapped out with a Skrull. But in the end, they decide not to tell us. And instead, they leave us with a set of clues that we can follow to try and come to a conclusion ourselves. That said, I think these clues are fairly significant, and that I think we can nail down exactly when he did get swapped out. So let's follow the clues and see what we come up with.
We will figure this out.
Now, the first clue we have to work with is the fact that once he is rescued, he can't walk. Now, this could be that he'd just been strapped up for so long that his legs were tired, they were out of the game, and they needed some time to warm back up again. But I don't think that's the case. All the other people who have been rescued, it doesn't take them very long to be able to start walking around. Now, Rhodey may have been the very first one snatched, and I think he was. But he still would be able to walk around without too much time passing if he could. But the fact that we see him completely unable to use his legs and having to literally be carried out of there, I think that's definitive proof that the injury he sustains in Civil War when he gets shot down by Vision, that was the real Rhodey. The real Rhodey lost the use of his legs in that scene. So this at least gives us a starting point when we know it's human Rhodey, and we know it's at least sometime in the preceding 10 years. If we continue to keep an eye on Rhodey's legs, we can see that he wears leg braces in order to walk every moment that he's not in his suit, from the point he gets it from Tony in Civil War, through Infinity War, and through Endgame. The next time we see him after Endgame is in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But at that point, he's no longer wearing the leg braces. Could it be that he is just completely healed from his injuries between those times? I don't think so. That injury was incredibly significant. I don't think they're going to have him just suddenly healed up and fully able to walk. But what's the alternative? The alternative is that Rhodey is the Skrull Rhodey. And that Skrull decided enough time has passed, I'm going to say I've healed. And that Rhodey is now walking around without the leg braces. So this gives us an end point, a furthest point forward, where we can see and pretty confidently say it is a Skrull. So we now have a start point and an end point to work with. Well, what more clues do we have? The next big clue is, what is Rhodey wearing when he's rescued? We see him wearing a hospital gown in that scene where he's pulled out and brought from the compound where the Skrulls were keeping their captives. Have we seen Rhodey in a hospital gown like this before? Yes. In Civil War. When he is first shot down and is being checked out in the hospital, he's wearing this light blue hospital gown with a white collar. And that is exactly the hospital gown we see him wearing in Secret Invasion when he's being rescued. It looks like the same nightgown. Well, this is crazy significant. Could it be that Rhodey has been a Skrull ever since the events right after Civil War? I mean, it's hard to believe because in that scene, we see that Rhodey is being watched over by Vision, Tony, and Natasha. How could he be swapped out when he has those three keeping an eye on him? The thing is, they don't keep an eye on him the whole time. Sure, they are watching him at the onset and keeping an eye on him in that hospital. But shortly after the tests start and they start inspecting Rhodey in the hospital, Tony turns to Vision and starts questioning what happened. Vision admits that he had lost focus, and Tony questions how that's possible. In this interaction, Tony is questioning Vision and pointing out, yeah, Vision, this is kind of your fault. And Vision is feeling that guilt. He feels terrible about what has happened. So I think he's going to realize that when Rhodey comes out of his surgery, out of his procedures, he's not going to want to see Vision. So although we don't explicitly see Vision leave, I think he gets out of there. I think he decides he's not wanted in that moment. And he decides to leave people to themselves. Leaves Rhodey with just the people he would want to see. But that still leaves Tony and Natasha, right? Well, no, in the very next scene, Tony tells Natasha she needs to watch her back. That it's known that she let them go, them being Captain America and Bucky Barnes, and that they are going to come for her. So she flees. Right then and there, she flees the hospital. Well, that still leaves Tony, and Tony wouldn't leave his best friend, right? The thing is, there's no reason for Tony to think that Rhodey is actually in trouble here. And in that moment, right after Natasha leaves, he gets an alert from Friday. And that sends him off on his chase for Bucky for answers. And he starts going after Zemo. In that moment, while Rhodey is still being checked out in the hospital, everybody will have left. Tony doesn't wait for Rhodey to get out. He leaves immediately. So there's no one there left to protect him. And that's an opportune moment for the Skrulls to decide to make that swap. So that's it, right? He was taken post-injury in Civil War. Well, maybe, but still maybe not. There are still a few things that we need to take into consideration that we saw in the subsequent next two movies, in Infinity War and Endgame, in that question period. For one thing, in Endgame, we see Rhodey in the building when he gets hit by those missiles, and his suit gets damaged, and he has to crawl out of it. Now, first off, in this scene, he's bleeding, and he's bleeding red. Humans bleed red, but Skrulls bleed purple. So is this a sign that that's a human Rhodey? Unfortunately, no. We know that the Skrulls can imitate the blood color as well. We know that because at the beginning of Secret Invasion, when we see Agent Ross fall from the building, he is bleeding, and he's bleeding red. It isn't until he dies in that scene that the red blood turns purple. So we know that even injured, they can still copy every part of that human host. And so if this is a Skrull pretending to be Rhodey, that Skrull can still look like it's bleeding red. So no, this doesn't solve the problem. But we do see Rhodey crawling around, unable to use its legs as it crawls out of that suit. If this was a Skrull, I would think that it would use its legs at this point. In that scene, he is under rubble in a section that is quickly filling with water. All signs look like he's about to drown. At this time, the gig is up. What benefit do you have pretending to be crippled when it's just going to end up killing you? So I think if this was Skrull Rhodey, it would make sense for Skrull Rhodey to use her legs in this scene. You see, the only reason he gets out of that is because Ant-Man comes and brings him out. And we know that the Skrull imitating Rhodey would not gain the inability to use their legs. We know that the Skrulls take on the look of their hosts, but they don't inherit their weaknesses. We know this because in Captain Marvel, when one imitates an old lady, they're still able to do flips around a bus. They're still able to pack a punch. They still have their normal Skrull strength. And we know that when Gaia is imitating Nick Fury, she has to pretend to be sick. But as soon as a punch comes flying her way, she's able to stop that punch, despite still looking just like Nick Fury. So the weaknesses don't come with their shapeshifting. And so neither would that inability to use their legs. But the biggest question I have with the idea that it could be a Skrull Rhodey during the events of Endgame is what Gravik says to Nick Fury in this last episode of Secret Invasion. We know that Gravik, at the time of Endgame, is still under Fury's leadership. We know this because Fury says he had Gravik leading the group to collect the blood samples after the battle in Endgame. That means that Gravik would still be aligned with Nick Fury. He says he lost hope in Nick Fury when Nick Fury decided to go to space after that point. If that's the time when they lost their faith in Nick Fury and decided to start this little rebellion, well, that would be long after the events of Endgame. And so it wouldn't make sense for Rhodey in Infinity War and Endgame to be a Skrull, because at that point, Rhodey would be on Nick Fury's side, and therefore on the Skrull's side. So why would they take somebody that they're aligned with and secretly swap them out without telling their allies? The continuity here is questionable. And so I feel like it makes the most sense for that to still be human Rhodey, and the Skrull swap takes place after Endgame. But how would I explain the hospital robe then? Well, Rhodey did sustain a significant spinal injury during Civil War. That type of injury isn't the type of thing that you fix once and then you never have to see a doctor again. And if he was taking so much damage during the Endgame battle, which we know he did, it only makes sense for him to go back into the hospital to get checked out after those events. And that hospital gown, hospitals have multiple of the same type of hospital gown. So just because it looks the same doesn't mean it was the exact same one. He could have gone to a hospital that had the exact same hospital gown that he had worn previously. Just because we see him in a hospital gown being rescued, it just tells us that he was taken from a hospital. So it could have been when he was getting checked out for his injuries during Endgame.
All right, good job, guys.
And just when I thought I had all the clues gathered and was ready to come to a conclusion as to when Rhodey got taken, another clue pops out of the woodwork that we have to take very seriously. Ali Salim, the director of Secret Invasion, in an interview after episode 6, had this to say. A lot of people have asked about, definitively, when did Rhodey? I think his leg's not working in the end of the episode 6, and him being in the hospital gown points to Captain America Civil War. And from there, does it have to be definitive? Or is it more fun for the audience to go back and revisit every moment, every Rhodey moment, and look at it with a different lens now that they think, oh, he might have been a Skrull there, and make the decision for themselves? Or it'll be answered in Armor Wars. Wow, that is some important information. So is the director himself saying, yes, Rhodey was taken during the events of Civil War? Sort of. He definitely says it hints at that, but he says there's still some ambiguity there. It's not definitive. And I think that that's the right answer. I think Marvel is specifically trying to keep this ambiguous, trying to keep the window open for them to decide which direction it needs to go. Yes, hospital gown definitely points to Civil War, but there's a lot of questions there. The continuity brings up questions as to, well, why did they swap him out that early? And with Armor Wars coming out, they don't want to give all the answers right now. They need some intrigue leading up to that show. So the window is open that it could still be either of these two possibilities. So in the end, do we follow the hospital gown or do we follow the mechanical legs? Now, despite the fact that Marvel is still leaving this question open, leaving open that window for it to be either one, at this point that we're at right now, I think we have to assume that Rhodey was taken during Civil War. Wearing that hospital gown, they don't make decisions like that unless they have a reason. Marvel is very particular about the things that they include in their shows and in their movies, and the fact that they put him in a hospital gown that exactly matches what we saw in Civil War, plus the director outright saying, yes, that's what this is hinting at. I think we have to assume that is when the swap happened. Now, that is heartbreaking because it means that Rhodey was not himself and has no knowledge of the events of Infinity War or Endgame. He doesn't know about Thanos and the Snap. He doesn't know that his best friend fell in battle. And so I really look forward to seeing how they decide to address this in Armor Wars. And the hope is still there that the swap could still have taken place after Endgame. So we can still look to that as a possibility. But for now, I think we have to assume it was in Civil War. But what do you think? Do you think it was in Civil War that they decided to make that swap for Rhodey? And if so, why? Why do you think the Skrulls decided to make that change when they were still in league with Nick Fury? Or do you think that swap took place later? Do you think it took place between Endgame and Falcon and the Winter Soldier? And if so, how do you think they explain the hospital gown? I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching.